As the Mariners continue to slide, the likelihood that Scott Servais isn't back in 2025 grows. We'll talk about that, as well as why Jerry Dipoto is unlikely to join Servais. Some more coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Wednesday, August 21st, 2024. This is TonaI and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, we'll be getting into some quotes from Mariners President of Baseball Operations, Jerry Dipoto, on the state of the team, one of which seems pretty damning about the future of Scott Servais in Seattle. We'll also talk about why Dipoto himself is unlikely to join Servais if Servais is not retained this offseason. But we're actually going to start with last night's 6-3 loss to the Dodgers and some thoughts on the bullpen. Now, before we do that, shout out to our title sponsor today, PrizePicks. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use the promo code LockedOnMLB. That's all lowercase for a first deposit match up to $100. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. So, Colby, we've obviously given this offense, rightfully so, a lot of grief this season. But this Mariners bullpen hasn't really done this team a lot of favors either. Now, has it?
No, I think it's safe to say for the first time since 2019, maybe 2020, the Mariners bullpen is a problem. It is not a part of the solution. When you just break it down since the All-Star break, the Mariners bullpen ranks third with the third worst F-WAR produced in that time period, so a little over a month now. And this is despite them having to throw the second fewest innings in all of baseball. So WAR is a cumulative stat. The more you play, in theory, the higher your WAR should go. So the fact that the Mariners rank so low on F-WAR in that time period, while also barely having to pitch, says that when they do come in, it's a pretty negative impact. We're talking about so far cumulatively half a win that this team is that this bullpen has cost by F-WAR standard. So they aren't having to cover insane number of innings or anything like that. So you can't blame the starting rotation for that. You look at just in that time period, the group has a 5 ERA. They have a 4.69 FIP. So that's obviously, a big problem here. So when you break it down individually, you kind of start to see why this is happening. Ryan Stanek's not here anymore, but in his last two outings with Seattle, he had a 27 ERA and a 21.16 FIP. So, yeah. But when you start to break it down of guys who've actually been here for quite a bit, Taylor Saucedo, negative 0.2 WAR, 7.85 FIP. He's been terrible. Jimmy Garcia got off to a really good start here. He's been really bad his last 2 or 3 times out, and that's reflected in the numbers. He's running a 7.27 FIP. He's running a 20% home run to fly ball rate right now, walking 4 guys per 9. It's just been a disaster for his last few outings, and then that's given him a negative 0.4 F-WAR. You look at Trent Thornton, he's running a 5.87 FIP right now, a 6.43 ERA. You look at Andres Munoz, he's running a 3.72 ERA with a 4.92 FIP. Now, I would point out that last night's performance from Munoz is carrying a lot of that bad, those bad numbers. So Munoz has actually
there was also the Baez home run.
Right. Munoz has actually been pretty good. It just not on this road trip is when he started to struggle. So it's a little bit disingenuous to say Munoz has been really bad since the All-Star break. He's just really been bad this week, but it all counts together. I mean, you look at this, the 2 best relievers on the Mariners since the All-Star break by far, Colin Snyder, which I don't think would surprise anybody. He's running a 1.96 FIP and a 0.4 F-WAR with a 12.83% K rate and a 2.03% walk rate. Right behind him, I think this might surprise some people, Austin Voth has been very good since the All-Star break, running a 1.39 FIP, 0.3 wins above replacement in just 11 innings, 10.32 K per 9, and just 1.59 base on ball per 9. So right now, the Mariners bullpen is the way it's been since the All-Star break. Chargois has been fine. Snyder and Voth have been really good. I would say Munoz for the most part has been good, but obviously he's had a rough week here.
Last two times out though,
Right.
haven't gone well.
Yep.
Yeah.
And everybody else has been not major league quality. So while we continue to rag on the offense, rightfully so, and we should continue to do that, they are a big problem here.
They're the biggest problem still.
Right. They've given this team 3 leads with 7 or fewer outs to get. And we're not talking about, they're going to Saucedo to try and get the last 3 outs here and he's struggling. No, they're going to Munoz. They're going to Garcia. Those 2 guys have allowed home runs in all 3 of those games to lose those games. And how big are those 3 games right now? Well, if you win those 3 games, like you're expecting to, when you put your high leverage guys in there, all of a sudden your road trip right now is you're 4-4. Like you have, it's not a disaster road trip by any stretch. And you actually have a shot to have a winning road trip, which would have been huge. If you had won those 3 games right now, you're looking at the Astros and you're going like, yeah, they're on fire, but we're still only 2.5 back, 3 back. Like we still are definitely in this thing. And so we have to put blame on the bullpen, and it's really easy to put blame on like Scott for not managing the bullpen properly. How do you manage this when everybody you go to sucks? Like what and by the way, he managed last night perfectly, right? Well, I mean, you could argue he shouldn't have left Saucedo in to start that inning.
No.
But he went to Munoz to face Ohtani, Betts, Freeman, exactly what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And Munoz just didn't have it. And then he went back to him when a tie game in the 8th inning. They're like, okay, we're going to go back to Munoz. And again, Munoz just did not have it last night, and that's going to happen. But if you're going to lose a game because your bullpen blows a lead, you do it because you trust your best guy to get the job done. Scott did, Munoz didn't. And so instead of blaming Scott for how he handled that, like put some blame on who it should be put on. Jimmy Garcia is not pitching well right now. Andres Munoz has not pitched well on this road trip. He's barely pitched, but he hasn't pitched well on this road trip. Thornton hasn't been good for a month. Saucedo, we've been talking about it. He should have been sent down 4 weeks ago. Like he's not good. And so the Mariners right now are just, they don't have enough depth in this bullpen. And when you look at the injuries to Santos, who's barely pitched in this season, Brash hasn't pitched at all. Spire got hurt and he hasn't been effective. Those are like 3 of the 4 guys that you brought in thinking like, yeah, this is a really good bullpen. And they barely contributed at all because of injuries, essentially. So yeah, Munoz has been great, but he's not perfect. He's going to have bad outings. So yeah, you just kind of look at why the bullpen is the way it is. It's not hard to figure out. It's injuries. And then, they bring in Jimmy Garcia. And unfortunately, the guy who's been nails all year has had a really bad 10-day stretch right when you needed him the most. And that's just sometimes how it goes. So it sucks, but the bullpen definitely needs to be critiqued more heavily than it has been thus far by all of us.
To further illustrate this as well, the Mariners bullpen since the All-Star break ranks 3rd worst in win probability added. So whenever the Mariners bullpen comes in, their chances of winning that game diminishes.
Yep.
Yeah, so not great. So when you have a completely inept offense and a bullpen that's struggling like this, yeah, it isn't hard to how they're losing all of these games in the fashion that they're losing them right now.
Nope.
All right, so let's turn the page here and look a little bit more at the big picture, because this thing continues to fall apart, and it seems like someone, at the very least, maybe many someones, are going to pay the price for this later this week. Go over that in just a moment, but first, a reminder: this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Again, that is ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Tonight, you can catch all the action between the Mariners and the Dodgers on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. Jerry Dipoto has been interviewed by Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic. That article was posted earlier this morning, in which Jerry said, quote, "Coming into the season, we all thought this was the most talented group that we've had. We're looking at everything. There is no stone unturned. We've talked about getting back to grassroots with what our hitting philosophy is and what we are about, the way we message it to our players, or are we overcomplicating it with the information we provide and the strategies we employ? I can say this, me, our coaches, our staff, none of us is blameless. We have really struggled to play offense this year." That's an understatement. And it's not just on our players for not doing that. That would be a cop-out. Asked if he felt responsible, Dipoto said, "Very. Ultimately, the dirt roads lead back to putting the roster together, and that's me. I don't want to minimize the contributions of Justin Hollander, our scouts, but ultimately the responsibility is mine." The quote that I really want to talk about here, though, is the one about Scott Servais. Ken Rosenthal outright asked Jerry if the Mariners might benefit from having a new voice instead of Scott Servais in the clubhouse. And Jerry said, quote, "It definitely has to be a consideration for us to talk through everything. That's just reality. We've underperformed, and there is some discussion for each of us to have about the part we have played in coming up as short as we have to this point." So Colby, I know you're not one to read too deep into interviews and quotes, especially when it comes to baseball executives. But just listening to the wording there that Jerry specifically used, that to me doesn't sound like a guy that's going anywhere anytime soon. That doesn't sound like a guy that thinks that he's at risk of losing his job as soon as this winter. But that quote about Scott Servais does seem like there's actually going to be a conversation about that. Now, they don't have to fire Scott Servais. His contract is up at the end of this season, so they just don't have to retain him.
Right. Still going to be a pretty difficult conversation for Jerry. I'm assuming he's the one that'll have to have it. Those guys are friends, in real life and all that stuff. Like, it's not just a working relationship there. It'll be the first time Scott's been fired, or let go, whatever you want to call it. But I think Jerry's just being honest. At some point, like, we have to consider everything. We have to look at everything. And, obviously to me, what that reads is like, yeah, we've at least discussed the same idea that, like, hey, maybe these guys just need a new voice in the clubhouse. So to me, they've at least discussed that as maybe a potential way to upgrade, is just like, hey, let's get a new voice in here, and let's do it that way. So, and again, there's still outs. Like, I'm going to assume that Scott, if he wants to manage, he will get another manager's job at some point. Maybe not this winter, but he would get one down the line. He's done a pretty good job overall with the Mariners. He's won a lot of games. He's kind of, navigated a rebuild, which is, a big thing that a lot of teams are doing right now. He's come out the other side. Like, obviously there's typically he gets a lot of, credit and all that for his culture building ability. So he's going to get another shot if he wants it. But it's also possible that the Mariners just look at it and say, hey, do you want to join the front office and be part of the player development, like what he was doing for Texas before he was the manager? Maybe it's as simple as, hey, Scott, like, why don't you just come on up to the front office and we can do that. And then if you get another shot to manage elsewhere, we'll happily allow you to go and do that stuff. So, I do think that there is the possibility, or I do think it's likely that they've discussed specifically what Jerry said about, like, the element of, like, yeah, maybe it is time to get a new voice in there and kind of shake things up. So I think they're definitely discussing it. I think it has to be, it has to be discussed. Like, this isn't something that you just, like, don't even consider. But it's really tough for me to take anything any baseball exec says too seriously, because typically they don't have a lot of incentive to tell you the truth. Sure. It just doesn't benefit them all that much to tell the truth.
So my best guess here is that and we're going to get a lot deeper into why we shouldn't be surprised if Scott goes, but Jerry and by extent Justin stay. But my best guess here is that Scott's going to go. Some of the coaching staff is going to go. Not all of the coaching staff, at least, though. Now, there's obviously the question of, do they just promote Christopher Negron to manager or Manny Acta, right? But even if they don't, even if they make an outside hire, I think they would want to keep Pete Woodworth, of course. Anyone else that has had a hand in the pitching side of things, of course. Maybe there's some other guys that they like there as well. I can't imagine Jarrett DeHart is back after the absolute failure of the offense. But Jerry and Justin are at least going to get another year at this thing, at least. Because, again, this doesn't sound, and maybe I'm making more of it than it really is, but just the way that he's talking doesn't sound like a guy that thinks that he's going to get fired.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess the alternative, he's like, oh man, I'm already sending out resumes. Like, I like, what do you want him to say? You want him to sound like he knows he's getting fired? Like, to me, the quote or reading into the quote isn't what makes me think that Jerry's probably going to be back. It's what we've talked about a little bit on here. It's what we've talked a little bit about on our Patreon, and it's about what we're going to talk about next. Because, you know, again, we've mentioned this idea multiple times over the last few weeks about, you know, why Jerry's not a for sure thing to get fired, because he's going to do some things that John Stanton really, really appreciate. And he's good at those things. So we'll talk about exactly what here in a second. But yeah, to me, that element of it is why I think there's a better likelihood than not that Jerry is back next year. Not so much just he sounds like he thinks he's going to be back. Like, who cares what he sounds like? He's a GM. Like, that's his background. So,
yeah. So we'll see. It seems pretty clear to me where this thing is heading, unless there's a miraculous turnaround here over the next 5 or so weeks. Scott Servais is likely no longer going to be the Mariners manager, but Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander are probably going to be keeping their jobs at least for one more season. And at that point, you just hope that whatever it is they feel has led to their failures in adding quality major league offensive talent to push this thing across the finish line is reworked and reevaluated to the fullest extent. So I don't know if that's how John Stanton looks at it, you know, and the rest of that ownership group, as this is kind of the last go at it. But to me, I kind of feel like this has to be the last go at it. Like, this is the last shot you get at doing this thing.
Yeah. The kind of dynamic there that makes it interesting is that most of the time, you know, front offices and what they don't like the lame duck status, right? Where it's like, you get one more year and if this doesn't work, because then obviously it puts a lot of pressure on them to get it right. And they think they're going to get fired. They might make stupid decisions. So, but also, you know, these guys aren't stupid. So you can give them a 3-year extension and they know that, okay, whatever, if this goes sideways, I could easily be fired in August. It doesn't matter if I have a 3-year contract, they'll just pay me to go away. So there's kind of that little bit of, you know, psychology element to it, psychological element to it, where it's like, yeah, you don't want the guy to feel like he's, you know, working for his job right now, because he might make mistakes that he wouldn't otherwise make. But also, he's not stupid. He knows that he's, you know, fighting for his job right now. Right.
I mean, yeah, if, you know, say next year it goes pretty similar to this year, they don't make the playoffs for a third consecutive year after ending the drought, like, writing seems to be on the wall there.
Yeah.
But again, Jerry Dipoto, kind of the perfect baseball executive for how John Stanton wants to run his team. And we're going to get into that a little bit more here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is once again brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Think Tyreek Hill will get more than 90.5 yards in week 1, or that Caleb Williams will throw for fewer than 236.5 yards in his debut? Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, run your game. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Once again, tonight you can catch all the action between the Mariners and the Dodgers on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. So buying wins, that's the name of the game, folks, when it comes to running a baseball organization. How efficiently can I win baseball games? How many games can I win while spending as few dollars as possible, right? And Colby, you've seen this in our YouTube comments and replies to you and replies to us on Twitter. John Stanton just cares about winning enough where he can line his pockets, but not have to go overboard to win to get into the playoffs and keep you coming to the ballpark, right? There's a lot of comments that are essentially some variation of that statement. Well, we actually have some numbers to go over here that support that statement, essentially. In this chart here from a listener of ours named Isaac Levin at Isaac R. Levin on X, who compiled this list of all 30 MLB teams, their payrolls over the last 4 seasons, the 5-year average of those payrolls and the 3-year average of those payrolls, and what essentially the average of dollar per win is, right? How much teams are spending to win each individual baseball game they have over the last 3 years, 5 years, etc. So, for example, the New York Mets, they're number 1 over the last 3 years, over the last 5 years, at about $2.5 to $3 million. The Mariners, meanwhile, 6th lowest over the last 3 and 5 years, about $1.2 million spent per win by the Seattle Mariners. Colby, what does that actually mean?
Jerry Dipoto has proven that he is very good at winning baseball games. The Mariners have, I think, the 10th best record in baseball over the last four plus years, since 2021. He's very good at winning baseball games while operating under unreasonable or just really bad roster or salary constraints, essentially. Like, he's good at taking what money John Stanton's willing to dig out of his couch cushions, and he's able to turn that amount of money into a pretty good baseball team, a team that can, compete and win, and some years make the playoffs, some years win 90 games, some years win 85 games, but enough that you and I will still go to the ballpark to watch because they're in it, right?
Yeah,
like
we're still going to care deep into the season. We're still going to care and show up in August and September.
Yep. Jerry Dipoto is very good at that. That's what the graph tells us. And the fact that you only have to pay $1.2 million per win is huge because, as they say in Moneyball, the movie, not the book, your goal isn't to buy players, your goal is to buy wins, right? And if you're operating under a budget constraint like Jerry Dipoto has been for the last 3, 4, 5 years now, then buying wins as cheap as you can is great, because here's the deal. There's no difference between a $3 million win and a $1 million win. It's a win, right? Mm-hmm. So most, and this isn't just a John Stanton problem either, by the way, most owners would love to have a baseball executive, the guy running their baseball team, to be on the bottom 10 of that list, right? Like, we want you to spend as little as possible and win as many games as possible, because that's where I make the most money, right? I spend as little as I can, but I rake in all this extra money because I keep on winning. People keep on spending money. Like, it's very simple, right? It's how any business operates, right? You want to spend as little as you can and make as much as you can, and you maximize your profit. And that is I would say, to be generous, 90% of the owners in Major League Baseball, it's probably higher than that even, but that's how they operate. They want to spend as little as possible, maximize their profit. John Stanton has given us literally zero reason to believe he's not that guy. Like every step along the way, even though he'll say he's not that guy, but action speaks louder than words. And every step along the way, he has been that guy.
And even though that they spend more than the A's and the Rays and the Guardians and et cetera, those teams of the world, right? Like they still don't spend as much as they probably should.
No, we know this team is profitable. We know that, right? There was some report that they're the most profitable team in baseball. That's not true, but whatever. They're making money. Like they are not operating at a loss. The value of their franchise continues to go up and up and up. It's already worth double what Stanton paid for it to begin with in just 5 or what has it been, like 10 years now since Stanton bought the team? Like it's already double what he paid for it. So he's not losing money. We know that. But the whole point of this exercise this discussion is to say that what John Stanton cares about the most is finding that sweet spot where he's spending as little as possible, winning as much as possible so that he can make the most profit he possibly can. Jerry Dipoto is really good at that, or he has been for the last 5 years. So if that's the case, why would Jerry be fired? He's doing exactly what John Stanton wants him to do. Like we've talked about, Jerry is a guy who around the league, people didn't like that he left the Angels the way he did, resigning in the middle of the year. So there are going to be those who hold that against him for his entire life. And if he fails here in Seattle, or if he gets fired, or if he quits or whatever, then you're very likely looking at a situation where, Jerry quits when things get tough, blah, blah, blah. And now that might be the end of his career. So not only does Jerry do the thing that John Stanton cares about more than anything, like not only does he do that very, very well,
right?
Jerry also has less leverage than he might otherwise have in negotiations. Yeah. And on top of that, Jerry, for the most part, last year pretty rough, but for the most part, he's good with the media. He's charismatic, like he's a guy who likes to talk and all that stuff. Yeah. And the most important thing here, he has been more than willing to step out and take all the arrows that have been fired at John Stanton, and he's willing to say it's my fault instead, and continuing to publicly back his owner, even though he literally has screwed Jerry 3 off seasons in a row.
Yeah, I mean,
look, you combine all that together. I don't know if John Stanton thinks that he can do any better than Jerry Dipoto. He's the perfect guy. Yeah, so that's why I don't think Jerry's going anywhere.
Let me find this quote here from that interview today. Yeah, he said, quote, "I don't think it's been a problem for us. I really don't think it's ever been a problem for us," talking about, a lack of resources. Somebody is going to have the highest payroll. Somebody will have the lowest. Our general place in that continuum has been consistent with our revenue streams. We operate to our market. I mean, that's what John Stanton would want him to say, right?
Basically, John Stanton wrote that and Jerry repeated it. And because Jerry is willing to be kind of a parrot for the business side of things on John Stanton's behalf, that's another point in his favor. So Jerry, you start to lay this all out. Jerry is very good at what John Stanton cares the most about, which is
he's the perfect executive for John Stanton. This is why it ultimately, at the end of the day, makes a ton of sense, actually, if Scott Servais is the one that goes and Jerry and Justin stay, because to John Stanton, to the rest of the public, to the fan base, those guys are at fault. Those guys should be held accountable for what's happened. But to John Stanton, they've done nothing wrong.
They've done exactly what I needed them to do, exactly what I've hired them to do.
Yeah.
Like in John Stanton's, and by the way, he might publicly come out and be like, "Oh, well, yeah, it's disappointing, blah, blah, blah." He doesn't care about that. We know he doesn't care about that. He cares that his profits are protected. Jerry Dipoto is really good at that because Jerry's done it for the last 4 or 5 years. And because Jerry is proven that he is good enough at the actual baseball side of his job to continue to do that over and over and over again. He's finding the young talent. He's finding the cheap talent. He's good at moving money around when he has to. Like Jerry is like, he he is Stanton's dream executive, and that's probably why he's going to stick around. And we can be upset about that. Again,
I mean, the other outcome here potentially. This comes from Brennan at Pint Size Analyze. And this could be the only other perfect scenario essentially for John Stanton. You know who the Mariners VP of Baseball Administration is, Colby? It's John Stanton's son.
Yeah.
Tim Stanton. So is it they move on from Jerry and Justin and Tim Stanton becomes the new GM / president of baseball operations?
He's probably on the short list, which should terrify everybody. So
right. So yeah.
And by the way,
if
that's
the alternative. Yeah, I don't care how much Jerry and Justin have failed to add major league offensive talent to the roster. Right. I'd much rather have them.
And oh, by the way, him being in that position makes it easier for like the fans to be like, no, yeah, Jerry and Justin are great. We'll totally keep them if it means avoiding adding that guy, like giving that guy more power. So
see my reaction to that. Like, yeah,
right. And it's the correct reaction, but it's still like, oh, so yeah, now here's this even like other safety net I can deploy. Like basically, again, Jerry is the perfect executive for what Stanton wants to accomplish here. But that doesn't mean that Jerry couldn't be the perfect or a good executive if John Stanton actually, gave a damn about adding significant payroll and pushing this team over the top. Jerry would probably be pretty good at that too. I think Jerry's just a good executive, but specifically for what Stanton wants, he's probably the best that he can possibly have right now. So I don't think he's going anywhere.
All right, that is going to do it for our show. But before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dan Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Now head on over to Locked On Seahawks to get all the latest on the Hawks from Corbin Smith and the gang, and tell them Ty and Colby sent you. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.